Welcome back, guys, to week number 3. We are going to do a review lesson today with some questions. But before we start, we'll do our mindful minute. So, wherever you are, find a comfortable seat where you can sit with a mindful body, with your head, neck, and spine aligned. And we'll take deep belly breaths in and out through our nose together for 1 minute. I invite you to close your eyes or look down, or you can watch the animation on the screen. And inhale through your nose, exhale, deep breath in, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, energizing oxygen, and exhale, pushing out carbon dioxide. Inhale, fresh oxygen, and exhale, pushing the air out. 2 more. Inhale, exhale, and inhale, exhale. Allow your breathing to return to normal. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. And let's get started. So we have a couple of Regents questions that we're just going to go over and annotate some key points and an answer so that you guys are prepared for your Kahoot game, which is part 2 for this week, and then your assessment, which is part 3. So today's learning target is I can review my understanding of genetics. What I recommend for today is take notes on any key points that come up for you while we're going over the questions, and of course, start by writing your learning target. So you can pause the video now to do that. Okay, the first Regents question. I'm going to read the question and the answer options. A Chihuahua, that's a type of dog, is born having a trait that is different from either of its parents. A possible explanation for the difference is that the Chihuahua puppy, one, was produced as a result of the recombination of genes during sexual reproduction. Two, was produced as a result of the process of asexual reproduction. Three, inherited a gene from one of its grandparents and not its parents. Or 4, had a mutation that occurred after it was born. So we're going to start by eliminating options that don't make sense. So why don't you pause the video now and decide which options don't make sense? Okay, so number 4 and number 2 we can eliminate. And why is that? Well, number 2 says the process of asexual reproduction. This is involving only one parent. So this is the type of reproduction that plants and bacteria and single-celled organisms will go through. Or like we saw in our one lesson, a starfish can go through asexual reproduction and grow back an arm if it loses an arm. So a chihuahua, it has to have 2 parents. So that actually doesn't make sense. And then a mutation that occurred after it was born, most mutations happen during the process where the embryo is developing. So that one doesn't make sense. And inherit your grandparent genes and then skip your parents. So you can have some of your grandparents' genes, but they come to you through your parents, through your mom and dad. So If we're looking at 1, the recombination of genes during asexual reproduction, this is when your genes that are 50% mom and 50% dad get kind of like mixed up. And that's why you'll see if you have siblings, you don't look identical to your siblings and you don't look identical to your parents. It's because those genes get mixed up every time. So if you have like an older sister, you might have traits that are similar, but you won't look identical to them because the genes get mixed up, or there's different combinations that are made each time someone is born. Okay, next question. During the process of chromosome replication, a genetic error occurs. As a result, a sequence of events occurs as described below. Event A, a protein with a new sequence of amino acids is produced. Event B, a DNA strand with an altered base sequence is formed. Event C, a new inheritable trait is expressed in an organism. And event D, an mRNA strand with a new sequence of bases is synthesized. The usual order in which these events occur is, okay, so this question's asking what's the usual order that these events A, B, C, and D should go? If we look back at our question, it says during the process of replication, so that's when what? That's when DNA copies itself. So a genetic error occurs. What else pops out to you just in that sentence? A genetic error is referring to what? It's referring to a mutation. So, okay, now we know a mutation is happening. So how should these events be ordered? How should they be put in order? Pause the video now and try it on your own. To answer this question, we need to know what a mutation is and then what's the result. So mutation is a change in the what? In the DNA. So if we look at event B, this says a DNA strand with an altered base sequence is formed. Altered means changed or different. So that's the first step of a mutation, actually. That's event B. Okay, what do you think happens next? The DNA is different, and then what? Well, the mRNA that's made from the DNA is different. So an mRNA strand with a new sequence of bases is synthesized. Synthesized means made. So DNA and then the mRNA. We're looking at our options. We can already cross out these two. What happens next? Your mRNA then goes through a process and it makes what? Your mRNA goes through translation and it makes an amino acid, which then turns into a protein. So this is 3, and your proteins are what make your traits. Here's 4. So our answer is 1. So to summarize, DNA goes through transcription, which turns into mRNA, and mRNA goes through translation, which turns into amino acids. So DNA to mRNA, then it turns into amino acids, which give us proteins, and our proteins give us traits. Strongly encourage you write that down. Okay, next we're going to talk about gene expression. Which statement is an example of how the external environment can influence gene expression? So what is gene expression? We talked about this in week 2. That's when a gene can either be displayed or not displayed. So remember the example with the Himalayan rabbit? Here's a Himalayan rabbit. What do you remember about this? That sometimes it can actually grow black fur even though it has mostly white fur. And it was dependent on what about the environment? It was dependent on weather or temperature. So if this rabbit was exposed to cold, it would grow areas of dark fur. And if it was not, then it would have white fur. That shows the expression of genes. Okay, so which statement is an example of this? One, some flowering plants that inherit a gene for white flowers and a gene for red flowers will produce pink flowers. Two, some animals that inherit genes for brown fur will grow white fur if the outside temperature falls below a certain level. Three, in some breeds of cat, certain fur color genes are found only in females. Or four, a pea plant is short stemmed only if it inherits the genes for the trait from both parents. Okay, now which ones can we cross out? We know they don't make any sense. Well, let's see. 1 and 4 actually are addressing what we talked about with getting 50% DNA from both parents. So a flower producing pink flowers is because one parent is red, one parent is white, and this pea plant inherits traits from both parents. So that actually does not necessarily mean that those traits are expressed or not. It's these two statements are just saying half of the genes are from mom, half of them are from dad. So this one, number 2, mentions the outside temperature falls below a certain level. So this is something in the environment that can affect the trait. So the trait is expressed or not based on temperature, just like with the Himalayan rabbit. So a key point you could write down from this slide is that the environment influences gene expression. Okay, next question is going to start talking about biotechnology. The diagram represents an important biological technique scientists rely on to produce replacement hormones. I'm going to flip ahead so that we can see the picture. So we see here DNA of a human cell and then a specific section of human DNA. It looks like it's being removed and looks like it's being put into bacterial DNA. So bacterial DNA over here is removed from the bacteria. They look like they're put together and then they're put back into a bacterial cell. So this is a technique in biotechnology. Which two processes are required for the technique to successfully produce hormones? 1, replication of DNA in bacterial cells and cell division. 2, replication of DNA in bacterial cells and gamete formation. 3, meiosis and development. 4, mitosis and fertilization. So what technique is this talking about? This is talking about genetic engineering. Whenever you see a diagram like this with cells and different parts of the cells being cut out, this is talking about genetic engineering. I'm just going to abbreviate that. All right, so remember when we talked about insulin being produced using genetic engineering? So that's why the question over here says replacement hormones. It's actually referring to insulin because insulin is made through genetic engineering. So, what is the benefit of using genetic engineering to produce insulin? It has something to do with the bacterial cell. Well, the bacterial cell can reproduce very fast, and therefore it could produce a lot of the insulin in a short amount of time. So, we don't need fertilization in this example. Meiosis is the production of sex cells. We're going to learn that in the next unit. And gamete formation is a sex cell, so that doesn't make sense either. We need DNA to replicate. We need that DNA to be copied very fast in bacterial cells and the cell to divide so that we can have our insulin produced. So, key point here, genetic engineering is used to produce hormones such as insulin. And one of the benefits is that it can be produced very fast because bacterial cells go through asexual reproduction and they reproduce very quickly. Okay, next question. Studies have shown that children are especially vulnerable to the effects of ultraviolet UV radiation. That's radiation that comes from the sun, which is why we have to wear sunscreen. Tanning beds expose the skin to nearly 10 times as much UV radiation as natural sunlight. With that knowledge, a law was passed in New York State to prevent individuals under the age of 18 from using tanning beds. Which statement explains why UV radiation is so harmful? 1. Certain environmental factors can increase the occurrence of harmful gene mutations. 2. Diseases are all caused by exposure to environmental factors. 3. Homeostasis in an organism is increased by the presence of radiation. 4. Radiation decreases the likelihood that infectious agents cause mutations. So, we talked about UV radiation in our lesson last week. Maybe you might recall what we were talking about. But let's go ahead and cross out some that don't make any sense. So, this is saying that UV radiation is dangerous. So, I don't think that homeostasis is going to be increased by radiation. And I also don't think that radiation is going to decrease the likelihood of infectious agents. So now we're left between 1 and 2. If we look at 1, it's saying certain environmental factors can cause mutations. And number 2 is saying diseases are all caused by environmental factors. That's not true. Diseases can be inherited too. So we're left with 1. UV radiation can actually cause skin cancer. Here's a picture of what skin cancer would look like. So it could be caused by radiation from the sun. And what happens is there becomes an uncontrolled cell division, which turns into a tumor, also known as cancer. So the cells just kind of divide uncontrollably. Okay, those are all the questions we're going to review for today. The next thing you guys are going to do is head over to Google Classroom. The next thing you're going to do is head over to Google Classroom and you will do a Kahoot challenge and then you have an assessment. See you guys next time.